I note that a quorum is present, and without objections, the chair is authorized to call a recess at any time. Good morning, and welcome to First Higher Education and Workforce Development Subcommittee hearing of the 119th Congress. I'm excited to be discussing a bill today that we worked on with our partners on the other side of the aisle to pass in the last Congress. Although it failed to cross the line, we're looking forward to restarting the conversation on a Workforce for America Act. It's the belief that it is good for both the workers and the employees of America. A strong workforce development system is vital to growing our economy and providing economic opportunities to every American. Employers are seeking high quality workers to fill the nearly 8 million open jobs in the United States, while we also have 6.8 million people unemployed, many without the skills needed for these available jobs, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. A stronger Workforce of America Act seeks to help bridge the gap by bringing employers and workers together. When the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, was enacted in 2014, it streamlined federal workforce development programs and improved accountability. However, more than a decade later, significant challenges still exist that hamper the workforce system's ability to provide high-quality services to youth, workers, and employers to help fill the job openings in the growing and in-demand industries. The Stronger Workforce for America Act made critical reforms to encourage better outcomes for the workers and employers under WIOA. The bill ensured at least 50% of adults and dislocated workers funding will be dedicated to providing workers the skills they need, and through the individual training accounts and on-the-job learning and other employee-led, the industry-relevant programs with the appropriate flexibility built into the allowing funds to also be used to support workers receiving skills development. The bill will also increase connections between employers and workers. For example, it will allow states to establish a critical industry skills fund to reimburse employers, sector partnerships, and other intermediaries for upskilling workers in the priority industries selected by the state. The bill strengthens the law's accountability mechanisms to ensure that WIOA funds are being used effectively. A Stronger Workforce for America Act also supported in-school and out-of-school youth by placing a greater emphasis on the work-based learning, pre-apprenticeship programs, and apprenticeships for youth while employing the quality of summer and year-round employment opportunities. It has strengthened workforce education programs at community colleges that aligns with the in-demand jobs by emphasizing programs with industry partnerships and those that use competency-based assessments to give academic credit for prior learning. Not only this, but the bill sought to improve WIOA by allowing states and regions to try out innovative ideas to make the workforce system more responsive and aligned with evidence-based practices. Smaller states can choose to consolidate their local regions to eliminate inefficiencies and to pool resources. This provision was based on my One Door to Work Act, which would provide states the same opportunities to innovate that my home state of Utah has enjoyed for decades. A Stronger Workforce for America Act makes critical updates to WIOA that will improve the skills development of workers provided under the law, strengthen connections between employers and the workforce system, and put more Americans on the pathway to a successful career. I look forward to hearing from our panel of witnesses, and with that, yield to the ranking member for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to also thank our witnesses for being here today. Workforce development is not just an abstract policy. It directly impacts the lives of North Carolinians and millions of Americans. As I've discussed with the chairman, this is an issue where we can come together and find common ground. And so I'm encouraged by the chance that we have today to make meaningful progress on this front. The workforce development system is vital to providing our workers with the skills that they need to succeed, helping employers find the required talent, and positioning our nation for future economic growth. But as we all know, significant gaps persist. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, was a landmark step forward when enacted in 2014. It was a bipartisan success that sought to streamline the complex web of workforce programs and improve the accountability of our workforce systems. WIOA's success uplifts my constituents as well as Americans throughout our country. In Charlotte alone, the local Workforce Development Board generates an annual economic impact of nearly $225 million and provides services to over 42,000 job seekers just last year alone. And none of this would be possible without a coordinated federal investment in workforce development. But more than a decade later, we still face systemic challenges that limit its effectiveness. WIOA was intended to address these challenges, but it has become clear that we need reform. Our workforce system must ensure that every worker, especially those without a bachelor's degree, can access good-paying jobs and gain the skills required to thrive in today's economy. Without a fully functioning system, we risk leaving behind a large portion of our workforce. We know job seekers, especially those without advanced degrees, face significant barriers to finding stable, meaningful employment. Similarly, businesses are continuing to look to fill openings with qualified candidates. And so I'm pleased that our committee has consistently led the way in addressing these challenges and reauthorizing WIOA. Last Congress, our committee advanced and the House passed the WIOA reauthorization bill on an overwhelmingly bipartisan basis. And then after the House acted, our committee and the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions reached a bipartisan bicameral agreement entitled A Stronger Workforce for America's Act. And this agreement updated WIOA to increase skills development, strengthen the connection between employers and the workforce system, and put more Americans on a path to success. A Stronger Workforce for America Act also upgraded the skills of our nation's workforce by dedicating 50% of the adult and dislocated worker funding towards upskilling workers and related wraparound supports. It ensured eligible displaced workers were provided individual training account vouchers with a value of at least $5,000 to enroll in a high-quality reskilling program. It emphasized initiatives that equip workers with the skills to fill jobs in critical industries and help the currently employed workforce improve their skills to avoid displacement and to advance their careers. It increased accountability by reforming what's known as the eligible training provider list to ensure that programs are of high quality and aligned with hiring demands. And it codified two important programs to help individuals released from incarceration can transition back to employment and strengthen workforce programs at community colleges. And so I'm particularly proud that A Stronger Workforce for America also focused on our nation's opportunity youth. These are young people aged 16 to 24 who are not in school, not at work, and as one of today's witnesses, Mr. Sainz notes in his excellent testimony, nearly 11% of 16 to 24-year-olds in my home state of North Carolina are disconnected from school or work. That's a big challenge for local communities, and that's why it's so critical that A Stronger Workforce for America included several key provisions aimed at helping opportunity youth gain employment opportunities and ensure that they receive services at local job centers. A Stronger Workforce for America was supported by a diverse coalition of stakeholders, ranging from AARP to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I wish to enter into the record an endorsement letter from scores of youth workforce organizations, including several locations in North Carolina, Mr. Chairman. And so, as my colleagues know, A Stronger Workforce for America was on the cusp of being law last December. Initially, it was included in the continuing resolution funding the government, but was unfortunately removed by the Speaker at the last minute, in part due to some misinformation circulating on social media. But today's hearing presents an important opportunity to get our effort back on track So I appreciate Chair Wahlberg and Subcommittee Chair Owens for convening. And finally, I am mindful that we are a little over a week away from a potential government shutdown. One of the reasons we must avert it is the importance of appropriately funding workforce development programs which have been chronically underfunded. And while the U.S. labor force has grown by roughly half over the past 4 decades, federal spending on workforce development has fallen by 2/3, and we must do better. So I'm excited, Mr. Chair, to hear from our witnesses today. I look forward to working with you to enact a stronger Workforce for America Act this year and continue to build a workforce system that supports workers, businesses, and our economy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Appreciate that. Pursuant to Committee Rules 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them into committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m., 14 days after this hearing, which is March 19, 2025. And without objections, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other materials to be noted during this hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I know at the subcommittee that some of my colleagues who are not permanent members of this subcommittee may be wavering on for the purpose of today's hearing. I now turn to an introduction of our 4 distinguished witnesses. My first witness is Dr. Stephen Moret, who's president and CEO of Strada Education Foundation, Washington, D.C. Previously, he was the CEO of Virginia Economic Development Partnership. Our second witness is Ms. Molly Dodge, who is the Senior Vice President of Workforce and Careers at the Ivy Tech Community College in Indianapolis, Indiana. Prior to this role, she was the Chancellor of Madison College campus of Ivy Tech Community College. The third witness is Mr. Robert Sainz, who is the Board Chair of the National Youth Employment Coalition in Washington, D.C. He also serves as a partner of the California Opportunity Youth Network and as Executive Director and President of the New Ways to Work. Our fourth witness is Mr. Nick Moore, who is Director of the Office of Education and Workforce Transformation in the Office of Governor Alabama, which is in Montgomery, Alabama. Previously served as a teach for AmeriCorps member in Laudis County, Alabama. He also worked in the offices of Representative Martha Robbie and Senator Luther Strange. We thank the witnesses for being here today, and we look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to the community rules, I will ask that each of you limit your oral presentation to 3-minute summary of your written statement. The clock will count down from 3 minutes, as committee members may have many questions for you, and you may like to spend as much time as possible on questions. Pursuant to Community Rule 8D, the committee practice, however, we will not cut off your testimony until you reach the 5-minute mark. I'd also like to remind the witnesses to be aware of the responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee. I'd like first to recognize Mr. Moret for your testimony.
Sorry. Good morning, Chairman Owens, Ranking Member Adams, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Stephen Moret, CEO of Strada Education Foundation. At Strada, we deploy a range of tools, including research, grant making, investments, and public policy solutions, all in support of a single mission, connecting education with opportunity. We believe in a future where every person, no matter where they start, can navigate their way to a quality education, a fulfilling career, and a life filled with growth and choices. Yet today, capable learners and eager employers are searching for each other in a system with too many walls and not enough doors. This is true across all career pathways, not just 2-year and 4-year degrees. For many WIOA participants, workforce training does not provide a strong economic foundation. For example, a 2023 Harvard study estimated that more than 40% of WIOA-funded training participants earn less than $25,000 per year. A foundational promise of our education and workforce systems is to knock down walls and open doors to opportunity. But these systems have struggled to keep up with the rapid evolution of work and learning. Too many WIOA participants finish training without securing a good job, while many employers struggle to find the talent with the skills that they need. A fundamental barrier to better outcomes for both individuals and employers is the lack of actionable data. Federal and state leaders should be commended for all that we do know about WIOA participants. But when it comes to what happens after program completion, we only know two things: whether participants got a job and how much they earned each quarter. Now it's time to break new ground. Despite the substantial data collected on who participates in a WIOA program, we lack three critical insights into their employment outcomes: what occupation they entered, the hourly pay rate, and where the job is located. By helping states that want to add these three data points to quarterly wage records, we can gain a clearer picture of how well workforce programs meet participant needs and employer needs. For example, are participants finding good jobs related to their training? Are workforce programs meeting employer needs, or are they training people for jobs in short supply? Are some participants earning low quarterly wages because they're in low-paying jobs, or is it because they're working part-time? Which occupations represent dead ends, and which ones lead to future upward mobility? With targeted enhancements to outcomes data, we could answer these and other important questions about WIOA, while also positioning individuals, employers, workforce boards, training providers, and policymakers to make better informed decisions. Strada today is supporting more than 15 states working to implement enhanced wage records. Congress can accelerate this movement by codifying and expanding WDQI grants as included in the bipartisan A Stronger Workforce for America Act. I refer you to my written testimony for additional details, and I applaud you all for the bipartisan work you are doing to modernize WIOA. Thank you, Chairman Owens.
Thank you so much. I'd like now to recognize Ms. Dodge for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Owens, Ranking Member Adams, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Molly Dodge, and I have the honor of serving as Senior Vice President of Workforce and Careers at Ivy Tech Community College, Indiana's largest post-secondary institution and America's largest singly accredited statewide community college system, serving over 200,000 students this year. At Ivy Tech, we are deeply committed to building a skills-based economy by providing high-impact career coaching, employer-aligned stackable credentials, and workforce training programs that directly support Indiana's key industries. As Indiana's largest WIOA training provider, we work closely with the Indiana Department of Workforce Development and 12 regional workforce boards to deliver training and business services to thousands of employers and learners. This work is vital in addressing Indiana's pressing workforce challenges, including a labor force with only 72 workers for every 100 open jobs. We support key provisions in this bill, including requiring no less than 50% of local workforce funding to be used for skills development, expanding individual training accounts for displaced workers, the establishment of a critical industry skills fund, increasing funding for industry-driven training models, and increased transparency related to outcomes and credentials earned, including their labor market value. Indiana faces an urgent demand for skills training, with projections indicating that 69% of our job openings in the next decade will require education beyond high school. Additionally, Indiana will need to upskill or reskill 82,000 learners annually through 2030 to meet our workforce demands. That's a staggering challenge, and one in which additional WIOA funds would be leveraged to address. A critical industry skills fund would provide strategic focus on workforce-aligned stackable short-term certificates and provide additional support to expand or develop training programs aligned to Indiana's priority industries. This provision validates the college's focus on co-production of talent with employers, such as our partnership with Eli Lilly and Company to create a pipeline of 1,000 trained biopharma technicians. Ivy Tech believes it is critical to provide transparent information about the credentials earned by our students and the value in the labor market, and therefore supports these provisions in the legislation. The college currently tracks student earnings post-graduation, ensuring our programs lead to wages above Indiana's median income. The college is also embarking on a new partnership with Credlens to enhance our understanding of the labor market value and outcomes associated with micro-credentials, industry certifications, and licensure program completions. The reauthorization of WIOA represents a critical opportunity to strengthen Indiana's workforce. Ivy Tech strongly supports the provisions in A Stronger Workforce for America Act, which align federal workforce investments with Indiana's economic priorities. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of this legislation.
Thank you so much. I now recognize Mr. Sainz.
Thank you. Chairman Owens, Ranking Member Adams, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to testify this morning. My name is Robert Sainz, and as previously mentioned, I spent 31 years in the public sector, 16 years as a WIOA administrator. Currently, I serve as Executive Director for New Ways to Work, as well as a partner with COIN, the California Opportunity Youth Network. And I previously was the president of the Workforce Development Council for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. As you can say, I like to work. And one of the reasons why I like to work is on this particular population of opportunity youth. The National Youth Employment Council has over 46 years of representation for this particular population. The 16 to 24 year olds in the country, there's 4.6 million who are not at school and who are not at work. And I'll say that again, it's nearly 4.3 million. That's over 10% of our young adult population not in school and not at work. And what are their life chances if they're not connected to school and work? So we need to be able to connect these young people now. Our economy is changing, and it's changing rapidly, and if they're not connected now, their life chances in terms of economic prosperity and mobility is going to be severely challenged. And as a membership organization with over 160 members throughout the country, we work extensively with federal, state, and local lawmakers to be able to advocate for this population, as well as to bring best practices of how to reach and to reconnect these young people to school and to work. As you know, all young people need supportive services. They need financial resources. They need basic needs like transportation, housing, and food. Opportunity youth are no different, but many times they do not have the access to these stable provisions. We need opportunity youth to be served because they are represented throughout the country. In Utah, 8.5% of 16 to 24-year-olds are disconnected. As mentioned previously, in North Carolina, nearly 11% are disconnected. And there's significant economic benefits to reconnecting young people to school and to work. The federal government itself would gain $11,900 for each young person who's reconnected every year. If we were to reconnect all 4.3 million opportunity youth in the United States, this will contribute $51 billion per year to the economy. Importantly, the economic benefits of reconnecting these youth show up in long-term indicators like increased income, discretionary spending, higher levels of home ownership, employment rates, and better overall health. Conversely, the costs of not reconnecting these young people are high. Each year, not reconnecting opportunity youth represent a tax burden of $13,900 and a social burden of $37,450. Fortunately, programs like the WIOA Youth, Youth Build, and Reentry Employment Opportunities serve as a lifeline to over 130,000 young people each year. Today's hearing comes at a critical moment. Young people are seeking jobs and seeking education, and employers need these young people to actually serve their labor needs. Programs like WIOA help connect these two interests, but as you know, the law has not been reauthorized since 2014. Last year, we came close of having the law passed. The bipartisan bicameral agreement to reauthorize WIOA, also known as a Stronger Workforce for America Act, came close to being passed, and it was in the right direction. It made major steps to connect more young people to school and work. And as a part of our efforts to support the bill, we created the Bipartisan Opportunity Youth Caucus in conjunction with Chairman Owens and former Congresswoman Steele. And this Bipartisan Opportunity Youth Caucus, we're hoping to have it reestablish this Congress as well, and hope all members can join. ASWA, NYC is supporting ASWA for many reasons. Number one is the $65 million competitive youth apprenticeship readiness grant that is going to actually increase youth apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship opportunities. It actually creates a new definition of, instead of in school, out of school, to talk about opportunity youth. We also support the bill because it codifies the Reentry Employment Opportunity Program. It also encourages or mandates the state and local workforce boards have a plan for opportunity youth. So we have more details in the written testimony here, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Sainz. I appreciate it. The last witness is Mr. Moore for your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Owens, Ranking Member Adams, and distinguished subcommittee members. It's a pleasure to testify before you today. Reauthorizing WIOA can incentivize states to align the workforce system with the economy. States were eager to see a Stronger Workforce for America Act, or H.R. 6655, become law last Congress, and 119th Congress provides another opportunity to modernize our nation's workforce system. For program year 2022, almost 44% of Alabama's WIOA Title I allocation was spent on administration. Just over 3,000 Alabamians exited training, and only 34% were employed in a training-related occupation a year later. The disparities between the results of the public workforce system and the realities of the labor market are also endemic nationally. In 2022, just over 200,000 Americans were provided training services through WIOA. Approximately 127,000 exited training, and just over 35% of those were employed in a training-related occupation. Alabama has combined work-based learning, industry-recognized credentials, and has launched the Alabama Talent Triad, working with the private sector as the nation's first full-scale talent marketplace in 2023. In 2024, Governor Ivey signed the Working for Alabama legislative package, which gives Alabama a mandate to improve performance. These aggressive state-led accountability measures go beyond federal requirements, which are just far too low. H.R. 6655 would have allowed states to be designated as single state local areas. This reform would allow states to reduce duplicative layers of administration while preserving local control and services for job seekers and employers. Revisions to Section 119 would have allowed states to negotiate performance levels with the U.S. Departments of Labor and Education by requiring those departments to first make and propose, and then for states to offer counter-proposals. These reforms would allow Alabama to align the WIOA performance indicators with state-determined goals. Amendments to Section 143 would have required at least 50% of local area funds to be expended on training, while also authorizing supportive services. These reforms would assist Alabama with training more workers rather than funding an inefficient workforce system. Amendments to Section 190 would have allowed up to 5 states already approved to be single state areas to receive a consolidated WIOA Title I grant. This reform would allow smaller states like Alabama to compete on a level playing field. Again, thank you, and I am grateful that this subcommittee is holding this hearing. I look forward to answering your questions. Working together, the Congress and the states can ensure that all Americans have an opportunity to reach the full measure of their God-given potential. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much for that. Under Committee Rule 9, we'll now question the witness under 5-minute rule. I will recognize myself for the first 5 minutes. Mr. Moret, in your written testimony, you talked about the need to use more data effectively to track and ultimately improve performances. In your experience, why are workforce and educational systems reluctant to improve their use of data, or do you think it's a lack of technical expertise?
Chairman Owens, thank you for that. Thank you for that thoughtful question. In my personal experience, higher education leaders generally welcome that data, but that data is not readily available to them. The vast majority of institutions don't have the data systems, the capacity to really track that at the institution level. So creating this sort of state-level capacity that can serve the whole state and all the institutions within the state, I think is a really critical step, and one of the reasons why we think the inclusion of sort of the expansion of WDQI grants in a Stronger Workforce America Act is such a positive development. I think as more data becomes available, I do think we're going to see those institutions be responsive. One of the big changes that has happened in the last few years is as affordability concerns have become really paramount in the public, we're seeing more and more higher education institution leaders being more and more focused on employment outcomes after completion. We think that's a really positive development, but we think they need better data to help them do that work.
Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Dodge, in your written statement, you mentioned the Critical Industry Skills Fund, an increase in the cap of incumbent work training that were proposed in the Stronger Workforce America Act. How will these provisions strengthen the connections between the workforce system and employers?
Thank you for that question, Chairman Owens. These provisions deepen employer engagement with the workforce system by making training investments more strategic, outcome-focused, and aligned with industry needs. That Critical Industry Skills Fund will provide performance-based payments to training providers, ensuring funds are directed toward industries that employers identify as critical to their growth. This provision puts employers in the driver's seat, or as we call this at Ivy Tech, co-production of talent with employers, allowing them to play a direct role in defining workforce needs and skills gaps. This fund can also incentivize regional partnerships where multiple employers in the same industry, like advanced manufacturing, healthcare, or logistics, co-develop training pipelines that benefit all businesses within the sector. And finally, increasing the cap on incumbent worker training enables local workforce boards to provide more funding for employers to upskill and retain experienced workers. As you heard in my testimony, that is critical to the growth of Indiana. And also, these funds will enable employers to reskill employees into hard-to-fill roles. So both of these provisions provide more agency to employers, ensure alignment of our training programs with real job market needs, and they also create a continuous feedback loop where employers can provide real-time feedback on training effectiveness, allowing training providers like community college to adapt those programs as needed.
Thank you so much for that. Mr. Moore, you mentioned in your testimony that a Stronger Workforce America Act would establish a pilot to allow certain states and local areas to receive their WIOA Title I grants as consolidated grants with increased flexibility. The provision is based on my One Door to Act, which was in turn based on reforms taken in Utah. How could such pilot authority benefit workers and employers in Alabama?
It's a very important question, Mr. Chairman. Over the last 6 program years, Alabama has lost 58% of its Title I-B funding. And at the same period of time, we've seen increased needs of our employers in each of our regions. And if we allow states working through your One Workforce solution to not only have the block grant for the Title I-B programs, but also to become a single state area, will allow more of those dollars to be spent on training and to get more people connected to the labor force so that we can begin to connect the labor force participation rate and the number of people that exit our WIOA programs.
Thank you. First of all, I'm very, very excited about this process we're going through and working with my colleagues across the board. This is something we all need. America needs big time. So thanks so much for that. I'm now going to recognize the ranking member for the purpose of her questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you to the witnesses today. Ms. Dodge, community colleges are the backbone of workforce training in this country. Now, I am a former professor of a 4-year institution, but I do understand the value of our community colleges as it relates to that, because they provide job training that's affordable, accessible, directly connected to employers' needs. But despite their importance, there's no dedicated funding for community colleges under WIOA. And that's why the bicameral, bipartisan, Stronger Workforce for America Act would have codified the strengthening community college training programs. We have them all over our state. We have one in my district in Charlotte. But Forsyth Tech, for example, received a $5 million grant to support workforce development and advanced manufacturing, working with 7 other community colleges in North Carolina to expand those opportunities. So what role do community colleges play in strengthening the workforce system? And why is dedicated capacity building investment like the Strengthening Community College Training Grant so critical for these institutions to meet employer demand, support workers who need training the most?
Thank you, Ranking Member Adams, for that question, and thank you for your passion for the mission and the goals of our community college system nationwide. This WIOA funding, this reauthorized bill, would enable community colleges to work in a more collaborative and systematic fashion with workforce boards as well as employers. Creating that backward designed program development from the needs of employers through the community college system and into even our high schools, CTE programs, provides a pipeline of workers for critical industries within the state of Indiana. That pipeline right now is leaky, and we lose individuals who do not understand or do not find their why in high school or in college. And that's where career coaching plays a very important role in ensuring that students know why they're enrolled in educational programs and what the outcome of those educational programs are. Also, the employers providing that pull system from these programs, being at the table, working with us on developing the curriculum, ensures that our graduates are offered interviews and ultimately hired for these hard-to-fill roles. As it relates to your,
Go ahead.
as it relates to your question about the Strengthening Community College grant, we were fortunate to receive such a grant in October of 2022. It's focused on helping employers in our state modernize and automate through the Manufacturing Skills Standards Council, their supply chains. This is a brand new certification that's industry aligned to the skills and competencies needed in logistics. That grant also provided us with critical funding to purchase equipment to offer this certification to our students.
Let me move on to this next question. We had, of course, the hurricanes last year in North Carolina, left thousands without shelter and work, and so WIOA dislocated worker programs. 11 counties were able to receive access to job training. Mr. Sainz, given the increased severity and frequency of natural disasters, would you explain the critical role that WIOA plays in disaster response?
Thank you for that timely question. In California, with the fires as an example, the WIOA dollars and emergency grants that have come from both the feds and the state has allowed the local workforce boards to actually employ dislocated workers to assist on the fire recovery. And as those programs has historically rolled out on the emergency programming, we were able to reach populations that had wanting to get back into the workforce and labor market, and it really provided a real strong way to connect them with immediate work opportunities.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize my colleagues from Missouri, Ms. Onder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all the witnesses for coming here for this important issue. One of the biggest impediments to the success of the federal workforce development programs is the amount of red tape that local workforce boards must navigate. In any reformation of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, we must make it easier for local workforce boards to partner with one-step partners to establish one-stop delivery systems. Right now, WIOA requires local boards to develop a memorandum of understanding with all one-stop partners pertaining to the operation of one-stop delivery systems in the local area. A key component of that is the infrastructure funding agreement, which establishes the costs for general one-stop operations, such as facility rental and so on. And many times there's confusion between the state method and the local method. This is often an unnecessarily long process that takes away valuable time and resources from helping people find jobs. So last Congress, the House passed a Stronger Workforce for America Act, which included language to reform the funding of one-stop infrastructure by removing the requirement on local boards to negotiate an IFA with the one-stop partners and defaulting to the state infrastructure mechanism. But I believe there's still more we can do to streamline these processes. Mr. Moore, in your testimony, you discussed how Alabama is striving to improve program efficiency. You mentioned that last year Governor Ivey signed into law the Alabama Workforce Transformation Act, which directs the Alabama Workforce Board to improve performance through technological integration. How can we, Mr. Moore, at the federal level, help states to leverage modern technological advances with the need for regulatory compliance and hopefully minimize that time needed for regulatory compliance?
Thank you for that very important question. So one, there's far too much system in the money right now, and I appreciate you mentioned the state funding mechanism, because right now states are required to watch local workforce development boards sometimes negotiate to the point of frustration until the governor can step in and provide the state funding mechanism. We can also, I think, look in a little bit more nuanced way about how we're funding the physical footprint for our one-stop delivery system. How many people do we have per square foot? What's the foot traffic? Are we simply giving somebody directions to the 7-Eleven, or are we actually delivering services in that foot traffic pattern? But we have to combine policy, technology, and process to make this system more efficient. Number one, we've got to make it easier to cross-train and maybe loosen up a little bit on the merit system requirements for Title I and III staff. And we have to embrace large language models to be able to improve the intake and assessment process, and that's what we're doing in Alabama through the Talent Triad. If you're a veteran that comes in with a joint service transcript, you should easily, in one stop, not have to go see John from 2 to 4 or Susie on next week from 1 to 5, but one case manager serving one customer to give them the sort of golden ticket to employment and their next stop on their training journey.
Thank you. Ms. Dodge, would you care to comment?
Well, I would just agree with Nick wholeheartedly. I think that as we think about the services being provided within these one-stops, we need to acknowledge that the adults that we're serving come to us with prior learning experiences. They come to us with workforce training that they've already taken, and we need to honor those skills and competencies, ensuring that they can either be reskilled into a highly needed job, or that they can enter post-secondary with academic credit on an academic pathway.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize my colleague from Virginia, Ms. Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Moret, you mentioned the challenges of getting enough data to know whether you're successful. How does the bill address that concern?
Okay. Thank you, Representative Scott, and I appreciate your service in my home state of Virginia. One of the things that we think is a really positive feature of the bill is the WDQI grants portion, and in particular the codification and expansion of those grants. And those grants have been helpful to a number of states in modernizing their education, employment, or data systems. One of the specific opportunities that we see is for states that want to create a more robust outcomes data, including the enhanced wage record opportunities that I talked about earlier. These grants can help give them the scarce resources they need to do that. So we think it's a really constructive part of the bill, and we also think that as more states implement that opportunity, that you're going to see more energy around it, more impact, and more interest in that area across the country, really enabled by the expansion of the WDQI grants.
Thank you. And Ms. Dodge, you mentioned sector training. One of the things that we want to make sure we have is when there's an entire sector where they need training, where one industry is pretty much phasing out, and you've identified another sector that where training can be very important. Does the bill make that identification process possible and effective?
That's a very important question, especially at the speed in which our economy is changing, both in Indiana and nationwide. I think what the bill stresses is that we use frameworks, skill-based frameworks like ONET, Credential Engine, and others to help learners understand what skills and competencies they have mastered and what the gap is between their current role and a new industry.
One of the things we've identified is a transition between automobiles, combustion engines to electric cars, and in a lot of areas, even in repairs and in parts manufacturing, there's going to be a transition. How would the bill affect that transition?
Also a great question. I think the deep employer engagement that is outlined in this bill is critical, especially in industries that are in transition. At Ivy Tech, we are still offering certificates aligned to the combustion engine, but we just launched, with the support of numerous employers and associations in Indiana, a new electric and hybrid vehicle certificate, which prepares students for the Automotive Service Excellence Light Duty Hybrid Electric Vehicle Specialist certification. And so, as we think about these transitions, it's critically important for local regional workforce boards to understand the employers within that region and what skills and competencies they're looking for.
Thank you. Mr. Sainz, many local workforce boards have had to cap individual training accounts at $2,000, and that's been quite a limit. Can you say something about the increase of that to $5,000?
Yes, sir. The increase in the the legislation that was proposed last year increased it to $5,000, which will really allow for longer-term training. I think one of the shortfalls that we've had within the system has been the emphasis on short-term training, 6-week or 8-week training, which does provide some immediate gains, but they're short gains. The longer-term investment in, like was just described by Mrs. Dodge, of the long-term training and having the resources to be able to pay for that, as well as to pay for the support services many of our young people need to have to be able to actually obtain the training is critical.
Thank you. And you mentioned the costs of not reconnecting opportunity youth with quality work. Can you say what some of the costs are in ignoring opportunity youth?
Yeah, very, very important. Our opportunity youth population does look different in comparison to the population that is connected to school and work. One of the biggest statistical deviations is that the young people have a higher reliance on public assistance, and that public assistance comes at a cost. And so if they're not working and if they're not in school, they have a higher reliance on public assistance. Secondary is their contributions to the tax base. If they're not working, they're not contributing to the tax base. And their likelihood of being a homeowner is very small. So not being a homeowner, it means that the stability as well as their contributions to the property tax base is lower. So it has some very negative effects for them not being connected. And the positive side is that the higher the income, or the higher the education, the higher the income, the higher the contributions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize my colleague from North Carolina, Ms. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you that are giving your testimony today. I've had the pleasure of reading your written testimonies, and for just a moment, I want to focus on this idea of accountability. And Mr. Moore, how does a training provider get on the list of programs that a workforce center can offer? And can just any employer or company get WIOA funds for providing training?
Well, thank you, sir, for that question. And there is a process under current law, and I believe the Stronger Workforce for America Act would improve that process. But it also is going to take states taking action as well to meet the federal government. And part of that is making sure that you've got a strong process for identifying credentials of value. So the credential that is put out from that program, and then that's not enough. We need to work to make sure that the credential is basically the wrapper, that the employer recognized skills that imbue that credential, that's what actually has currency in the labor market. So making sure that any eligible training provider has been in operation long enough to where you can demonstrate that, and I believe this bill takes the percentages and increases those, and states can go even further. But there certainly currently is a patchwork, and Governor Ivey in our state is working to improve our eligible training provider list so that when somebody completes a WIOA program, they can bank on the fact that they're going to be able to connect with an in-demand job.
And what happens if a training provider fails to meet the criteria?
They can be sanctioned and removed from the list, and I think that more states need to clean up their eligible training provider list. Sometimes there's hundreds, if not thousands, of programs on these lists, and it's very difficult for a student or a job seeker to be able to comb through all of that, so it leads to a lot of information asymmetry, and people don't necessarily know which programs are connected with an in-demand job.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dodge, it's important for students to know ahead of time what they can expect from a program. And one reform we should consider is requiring training providers like industry and community colleges to provide transparent information about the credentials they create. Help me, how can we make sure that these credentials line up to the labor market and are also valuable for the learner?
Well, that is the most important question for the learner and the success of the learner in America. To your point, Representative Harris, learners have to understand what is their return on investment for enrolling in post-secondary training. They also have to make sure, especially adults and older youth who have other responsibilities, including parenting or part-time work or even full-time work in an underemployed role, they have to understand that the post-secondary offering will meet their needs and is suitable for them. So encouraging or requiring providers on the ETPL to include program duration, the cost, including total expenses for the program, what the delivery method is, whether it's hands-on, in person, or online, ensures that our WIOA dollars will be invested in programs with measurable success.
Excellent. Well, it's great to see how all of you have partnered in your community to ensure your graduates are well prepared to enter the job market and when they leave your campus. And I think we all agree that we should ensure that all of our federal dollars are only going to programs that are going to do the same. In just my last minute, I want to come back to Mr. Moore for just a moment, because I firmly believe that the federal government's role in workforce development should primarily be to get out of the way. And I mean by that, I believe states, employers, schools, and individuals are best equipped to handle workforce preparation, and the federal government should simply ensure our laws, regulations, and taxes all promote job growth and a strong economy. Mr. Moore, I would just ask you specifically, how do mandates from the federal government impact your ability to respond to the needs of your state?
Well, I'll give you a good example. So in our annual performance report, the 6 core performance indicators measure an average of how many people were served and how many had a good outcome. So in Alabama, if we want to increase our labor force participation rate 1 percentage point, we've got to add 41,000 non-participators to the labor force. In our WIOA programs, we're training about 4,000, okay? But in our annual report, the U.S. Department of Education and Labor tell us that we're doing a good job. So part of the federal mandate that's getting in our way is telling us that we're doing a good job whenever we're, if we serve 9 out of 10 people well, but that is not actually aligned with the economy. If we've got 16 target populations and we've got close to 1 million people that need to be trained, saying that we're doing a good job by serving 9 out of 10 people, that's not lined up with reality.
I got you. Well, thank you all very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize my colleague from California, Mr. Cano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to witnesses for being here. Mr. Sainz, your testimony highlights the economic benefits of reconnecting opportunity youth to quality work and educational opportunities. You make the case that there's a strong return on investment when we ensure that young people have resources and support. I want to give you some time to elaborate on that.
Thank you. I would point the committee to some of the great research that has been done by the Social Science Research Council, Measure of America. They have extensively looked at this issue across the country and have published some direct reports on that. But in each of the studies, they're able to show both the relationship to economic output and contributions to educational levels. So out of that 4.3 million population that I speak of, about 40% do not have a high school diploma. So if you think about what is a young person's chances to succeed with economic mobility without a high school diploma, they're very small. So just that alone actually has a huge increase in their economic output by getting the high school diploma. The other 60% are folks that have graduated with a high school diploma but have not entered into higher education, training, apprenticeship programs, and/or the workforce. So being able to move them into the community college, being able to move them into apprenticeship programs, being able to move them into the workforce with a career, not just a part-time job. The other part of this study is that without them having this early work connection, their long-term work prospects become very, very shaky. In terms of being not laid off, the first in, first out, which happens in the labor market for these young people. So all of this contributes, if we're able to reconnect them early, have them have the work experiences that are called out in this legislation, having them reconnect to education and to training programs, their overall incomes will increase, and the overall productivity, both for their families, their communities, and for our overall economic health increases.
Well, thank you for that. You mentioned also that failing to connect opportunity youth with necessary resources impacts their community, both economically and socially. Can you describe those impacts, meaning the failure to connect youth?
Right, and so the failure to connect is what we actually see oftentimes on the front page of our metro section, where you have young people who are not participating in the economy, and the high concentration of these young people, usually in communities, really causes some of our community challenges. So you have higher costs that would go in terms of them in the justice system, higher costs for them for long-term connection to public support systems, and then the high costs that they will have on the health care. These are all indicators that without education and without work prospects, all go up. And so that's where you have direct, hard expenditures as well as the social costs of lack of productivity.
Well, thank you. I'm very proud that my district has a strong network of support for young people, including 6 youth opportunity centers in our region and a youth commission that liaises directly with the Riverside County Board of Supervisors. As one of the most rapidly growing areas in the country, workforce development is crucial to my district's infrastructure, and engaging young people is imperative. So, Mr. Sainz, how would the Stronger Workforce for America proposal increase youth participation in these career pathways, and what tangible impacts would districts like mine see?
And you have a great district and some great leadership in your district with those opportunity youth. They're part of our member network. So thank you for your leadership on this issue. ASWA does 2 really fundamental changes. One is on the eligibility, and someone had mentioned about making it easier to serve young people. Currently, as the regulations state, is that we wait for young people to have all the eligibility documentations before we start providing any services. And oftentimes those paperwork and those documentation in terms of having income tax records and even sometimes simple identification, they do not have at their ready. So being able to actually, in ASWA, give them time to actually bring that documentation to the programs, but you could start the services when the young people need the services. So when they come in and ask for the services, you're able to start and doing the enrollment. That's a critical piece in terms of retaining the young people in the programming. And then secondly is in terms of the authorization in the funding. The ASWA authorizes this beyond the fiscal 24 levels, which to me is really a great thing, because you need to be able to have the fiscal support for the programs in order to do these services.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry we went over, but you're very kind to allow him to finish his response.
Thank you so much, no problem. I'd like to now recognize my colleagues from Wisconsin, Mr. Groffman.
Thank you. Mr. Moret, or Dr. Moret, there's so many programs out there. We have a great technical college system in Wisconsin. I encourage young people to go there all the time. And I think everybody in Wisconsin is aware we have a great technical college system, so I don't know really why we need any federal involvement. But I will say this. I know there are complaints in the past that whenever the federal government gets involved in anything, more paperwork, that sort of thing. How can at a federal level we restructure WIOA to allow for less administrative burden and more flexibility at the local level?
Representative Grothman, I appreciate that question. And I would say not every state has a great technical college system, so it's great that Wisconsin does have one. Candidly, I think my colleagues, in particular Mr. Moore and Ms. Dodge, might be able to give you a more thoughtful question on how to reduce the federal sort of administrative burden on those local and regional workforce boards. I do think if we can empower those boards with better data about employment outcomes, it would help them to make better informed decisions. So we think that's a big opportunity, but it doesn't get necessarily directly at your question.
Okay, I mean, my tech schools, they all have, for every major you can get, percentage of people who are working, how much they're making, all this stuff. You feel that there's some states that don't have that should, actually, every institution of after high school, including four-year colleges, ought to have that information, but if they don't, they don't. Would anybody else let's take a swing at that? Or go ahead.
I was just going to say that there are very few higher education institutions today that could accurately report to you the occupational outcomes of their graduates. And even at the workforce boards, most of them do not have comprehensive data on the kinds of occupations people are getting. So when you look at the sort of training-aligned job outcomes, it's based on very incomplete information today.
Is that kind of inexcusable if they really cared about their students?
Well, I think that what we're suggesting is there's a systemic solution that would actually make it easier to collect all that data. If you look at employers today in the United States already report, every quarter as part of the UI wage records reporting who they employ, how much they make, and so forth. What they don't report today, for example, is the occupation or the title of those folks. And without that information, there's no comprehensive way to understand what those employment outcomes look like, so that institutions, policymakers, training providers, and others can be responsive to that real labor market demand.
Okay, Ms. Dodge, what do you feel, what role can technical colleges play in expanding competency-based education to better align with employer needs and industry standards?
That's a wonderful question, and I would just echo your comment about having an exceptional community college system in Wisconsin. We regularly benchmark your system, your community colleges in your state. Credit for prior learning is critically important if we want to effectively serve adults. I can't think of any one of us who would want to sit in a classroom learning something we already know, especially if we've already mastered a skill or competency. And essentially, without a systematic way of assigning credit for prior learning, we're doing just that to adults. It really, when that happens, it decreases their motivation to complete their education. It also wastes their time and money, and in some cases, employers' money, who are choosing to send them back to post-secondary training. So by really understanding and taking in that credit for prior learning assessment during intake into the WIOA system, we're getting that information that can be shared throughout the training provider system.
Okay, I think today just about anybody can get a four-year degree, but if I don't want to get you in trouble here, percentage-wise, how many of the people go into a four-year college today would probably be better off going to tech school or letting their own employer train them, something other, or I'll put it this way, what percent you think are making a mistake matriculating at a four-year university?
I hope my president isn't watching right now. No, I actually think it really depends on the student's career goals.
No, but just what percent? I mean, we know it's a mistake. When I look at my tech schools, there are people going there who have a four-year degree and got nothing for it, right? If I go to the trade schools, same thing. You talk to people who work for a business, and they'll just tell you honestly, I'm doing a good job here, but my degree was of no benefit to me in this job, for example. Okay, I guess we're not going to get an answer. You lucked out. Can we give them an answer? It's only a 1 hour. We're only looking
If you have a
for
very
num-
quick one, yeah, anybody have a
number.
quick answer to that?
Does anybody just give me a number?
Yes, sir. So in Alabama, only 24 out of 100 ninth graders have a bachelor's degree by the time they have gone through a 6-year cohort. So what we're trying to do is make all learning count, blurring the lines between work and learning. That way you can get a short-term credential, and if you want to, over your lifetime, bank that up towards a 2 or a 4-year degree. So I don't think these things have to be mutually exclusive. Somebody may earn a credential at one point in their life and then be able to use that in another way later on. But
Okay.
we've got to have the technology to make that happen, and that's
I
what
was, okay, I was going to say, we can submit that if we still need to get that answer, okay? Thank you so much, appreciate it. Okay, I'd like to recognize my colleague from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I ask my question, I just again want to go back to your opening remarks, which talked about the fact that actually the Stronger Workforce for America was a deal that we had agreed to, bicameral, bipartisan, last December. It was in Speaker Johnson's legislation for the continuing resolution. And within 6 hours, it was blown up because the Trump transition team, led by Elon Musk, demanded that the bill be stripped and cut for provisions because he complained he didn't understand what was in the legislation. Another measure, actually, which was from our committee, was the pharmacy benefit manager reform bill, which actually would help employers in terms of saving and having more transparency as far as pharmacy drug pricing is concerned. And again, that hit the cutting room floor. A great loss, actually, for particularly small businesses who are, carrying the brunt of these, backroom deals with pharmacy benefit managers. Another bipartisan, bicameral measure, which the transition team, basically stripped from the bill. I represent a district similar to my colleague sitting next to me in Eastern Connecticut, which has had a hiring boom at Electric Boat Shipyard. 5,300 hires in 2023, 4,000 last year. The target for this coming year is 3,000. The retention rate has actually been 86%, which sort of defied all the conventional wisdom that people don't want to work in manufacturing. And again, the WIOA Act was an instrumental part of that great success. The Eastern Connecticut Workforce Investment Board Manufacturing Pipeline Initiative, which has an accelerated course of 10 weeks for welders, 8 weeks for outside machinists and electricians. And again, that gets people a badge to go into the yard. And today, they're part of the process of building the Virginia-class and Columbia-class submarines. One aspect that also WIOA enabled was the Youth Manufacturing Pipeline Initiative, which reached out to not the career and technical schools, because frankly, they were already hitting all cylinders in terms of supplying metal trades workers, but they were actually going into comprehensive high schools. There were at least a dozen in southeastern Connecticut using WIOA funding that, again, has created new curriculums for kids who were, again, not able to get into career and technical schools, which have waiting lists at this point. So, Mr. Sainz, maybe you could talk about, again, how those, WIOA can really supplement, particularly the comprehensive high schools, in terms of giving kids an opportunity to learn a trade.
Yes, WIOA serves both in-school as well as out-of-school young people, as you know. On the in-school provisions, it really does make a difference when you're actually having the strong partnerships with the schools, with these industries. Many of our kids only know what they know. They know what their parents have done, their neighbors, and maybe family, friends. But oftentimes they're not exposed to great opportunities that might not be in their immediate family or immediate neighborhood. So one of the aspects that allows within WIOA is to do this career exploration, is being able to introduce them to things and new opportunities. So if you're coming from a blue-collar family that does not know about the technology and the new opportunities that are happening, WIOA allows you to expose them. The work experience part is also very, very critical, because it gives funding to actually have the young people experience the opportunity to walk into an industry they might not otherwise walk into. Oftentimes when we think about youth jobs, we think about the fast food and retail, but we don't think about these other opportunities to spark that innovation, to spark that curiosity for them to go into these fields.
Thank you. I mean, one high school, which is up in the northeast corner of Connecticut, Turtelot High School, again, comprehensive high school. Basically, about 60% of the student body goes to higher education, so that's a fairly sizable group that does not go into higher education. And again, using YMPI, they basically expanded welding labs for the students to, again, get a skill. School attendance went up when that was added to the curriculum. And again, these kids, when they're getting their diploma, are also getting a certificate, which makes them job ready to walk into, again, really good paying jobs in the shipyard. So Susan Smith, who is the superintendent, got to give her a shout out because she really sort of put all the pieces together to really basically transform kids' lives and actually get school attendance, up to where it really, we all want it to be. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you again. I'd like to now recognize the full committee chairman, Mr. Wahlberg from Michigan.
Mr. Chair, thank you, and thank you to the panel too, and thank you for holding this hearing. I'm excited about the subject and the opportunity that can come. Dr. Moret, one thing we hear consistently about employers and their response to WIOA is that they sometimes don't see the value in participating in it. You suggested that a fundamental barrier to greater employment engagement in WIOA is the lack of actionable data. And so why do you think more employers would participate in WIOA if there was greater transparency about the results?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great question. When I think about the past work that I've done at the state level and working with regional and local groups in Louisiana and Virginia, one of the challenges is that even when employer engagement is done very well, you're really only engaging a small percentage of the total employment base. In Virginia, for example, there's more than 200,000 employer establishments in the state, so you're never going to touch all of them. So the best model is one that combines both targeted engagement with real employers to sort of have a better understanding of their qualitative needs, but also one that gives you a comprehensive picture quantitatively of what's going on in the labor market and what those needs are. From my perspective, employer engagement in the workforce system is not just about whether employers are actively engaging with the workforce system, but in particular whether they're seeing the participants that get training funded through WIOA as attractive people to hire, right? Because that's the ultimate outcome that we really want, is for people to get good jobs and have good economic mobility. We think the kinds of enhanced wage record opportunities that we identified in my written testimony and that I covered earlier briefly in my opening remarks would go a long way to helping strengthen those connections with employers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Dodge, you mentioned in your written testimony that the statewide advisory boards and industry leaders in your state recently created short-term workforce-aligned certificate training. Can you give me some examples of this, and as a follow-up to that, how can short-term certificates help a worker with their long-term career goals?
Thank you for that important question, Chairman Wahlberg. Ivy Tech honed our employer-led playbook in 2021 when we launched a statewide Industry 4.0 employer advisory board, one of the first in the nation. Out of that work, and guided by the voice of Indiana employers like Enders Hauser, Caterpillar, Lippert, Amatrol, Berry Global, and others, as well as national associations like the American Technical Education Association, Ivy Tech was the first community college in the nation to launch a smart manufacturing digital integration degree. And that degree includes certifications that are aligned to the skills and competencies that employers who are highly automated are seeking. This degree was critical in Indiana's bid to recruit highly automated employers like SK Hynix and Star Plus Energy to our state. Because we have that playbook, we have reused it in other high demand critical areas like biopharmaceutical manufacturing, where those conversations are being led by our state's Life Sciences Talent Association, BioCrossroads, as well as certificates in semiconductor fabrication and certificates in data center technician and data center engineering operations led by the data centers that are locating in Indiana. This is really critical work because we know that a certificate is often aligned to an entry-level role at one of these industries. The goal that we have at Ivy Tech is to help a student make that transition into these industries, into a good technician role, and then as their career goals evolve over time, allow them to work with that employer to send them back to Ivy Tech Community College, leveraging their employer tuition benefit, hopefully, to upskill that technician into a more senior level role. Thank you.
Very much like Mr. Moore, what you talked about, that expanding opportunity, the base of experience as well that you build upon. And let me ask you this. A Stronger Workforce for America Act expands the number of states allowed to better align its local areas with the state's economic development goals. How can such realignment improve the workforce system? Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commuting patterns don't respect political boundaries, and since 1998, when WIOA was enacted, states have been unable to switch up the alignment of their local workforce development areas, including not being able to go to a single state workforce area. There's about a dozen states that were able to do that in 1998, including Mr. Burgess's home state, which has done a great job of making that alignment happen with not only human service, but workforce and education. So what this would do, Stronger Workforce for America Act, would allow a state and a legislature to enact a single state area, and then to be held accountable. If their performance falls within 5 years, they'll have to go back and reseat.
We'll push for that.
Yes,
my
sir.
time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize my colleague from Georgia, Ms. Macbeth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to each and every one of you, our witnesses this morning. And thank you to Ranking Member Adams. But thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. While I'm excited at the prospect of reauthorizing WIOA and updating our workforce system, we've frankly been here before. This bill should have been signed into law last December. And there's nothing efficient about needlessly delaying bipartisan legislation that Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member Scott and committees from both chambers have spent years negotiating, long before I even came to Congress, only to force us to try again next Congress. Americans, they are so frustrated, and rightfully so. They are frustrated by a government that doesn't put their needs first, and that has become more expensive, more difficult, and more time-consuming to simply get the skills necessary to get a good-paying job and provide a decent life for themselves and for their families. For too long, this country has limited the opportunities available to everyday Americans by failing to embrace the full scope of proven education and training programs. A four-year degree remains the surest path to economic success, but it's not the only way for Americans to get there. And we've got to do more to put effort and time and energy into uplifting community colleges, on-the-job training programs, and registered apprenticeship programs. The reality is that not everyone can afford to put their entire life on hold, take out a loan, and go back to school for 4 years to land a decent job or make a change in their career. This simply isn't a luxury that many of our families can afford to take for their children or for themselves. Workers and employers in this country, they need a workforce system that is easy for them to navigate, works for them, and meets them exactly where they are. And this is exactly what this bill will do. I'm so very proud to have my bill to authorize the Strengthening Community Colleges Training Grant included as Section 179 of this reauthorization. Over 200 community colleges in over 35 states rely on this funding to build capacity for new students and set up sector partnerships with employers in their own area. The bill also includes large portions of the Adult Education Works Act Another bill that I've led with Representatives Mervan and Senators Jack Reed and Todd Young on the Senate side. As our world grows and it changes as rapidly as it is never too late for people to learn. We must do more to support Americans who are making an active effort to better themselves in adulthood. A report from the National Skills Coalition found that 1/3 of workers don't have the foundational digital skills necessary for today's job market. Mr. Sainz, can you use what time there is left to discuss the importance of digital literacy skills and the need to update the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, or Title II of WIOA?
And thank you for all the great work that you have done on these issues. As you know, digital literacy is critical to all employers. Our former workforce development chair said, when he runs a very large import company, and just said 15 years ago, it was the biggest guy in the warehouse was the foreman. And he says now the person that we need as the lead in our warehouse has to speak at least 2 different languages, has to be have the digital skills, has to be able to have the capacity to think and not just to act. So, you know, that is really just critical how our economy has changed. We need to be able to have our young people and all of our workers to have the digital literacy. The connection to adult ed and the community college and the workforce is a part of the ecosystem. They're not separate entities. They have to work together. In Los Angeles, as a great example, there's navigators that go in between the workforce system, the adult ed, and the community colleges to land people in the right places to get the skills they need to get these very important jobs in the growing technology sector.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to be able to continue to really help support our workers, support our students in ways that my son Jordan never got a chance to. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you so much. I'd like to now recognize my colleagues from California, Mr. Colley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is good legislation. It's a good program because it empowers local communities for a very important public purpose, which is to get people into the workforce. Folks who are unemployed, underemployed, not sufficiently educated or trained. It gives them the tools to join the workforce, which is good across the board. Number one, it's good for these individuals who gain the ability to support themselves and their families. It's good for the employers who are able oftentimes to fill critical workforce needs. It's good for the taxpayer because we get people off of public assistance and actually turn them into taxpayers. It's good for the economy as a whole. It's good for the character and vitality of our country when more of our fellow citizens are actively engaged in productive work. The question I wanted to ask today, and we have representatives from various states, so just whoever would like to answer on this, is how we can better align these programs with our public assistance programs. Because during the COVID era, we had this phenomenon where unemployment insurance kind of got out of control, and people were being paid more to not work than to work. Even once we'd moved past all of these business closures and restrictions, employers just couldn't compete with the wages being offered by the unemployment programs. But then even other programs that incorporate work requirements or other such things, there's clearly an alignment here with the goals of WIOA. So I know Utah has created a model that's been lauded in that respect, but for representatives here of the other states, do you want to talk about how those objectives can be met?
Yes, sir, and we're definitely looking to emulate the Utah model. And it's clear that when you deliver workforce training services and human services concurrently, you're going to have a better ability for somebody to not only enter, but to persist in the workforce. But you've got to do that in a way that helps to limit the information asymmetry and what I'd like to call unrestricted customer choice. If somebody comes in the one-stop center, just like it's a two-generation problem, that if I'm a young person and I don't know what I want to be because I haven't seen all the opportunities, sometimes an adult walks in with those mental blockers on as well. So it's our job in the public workforce system using data to inform them what are the benefit cliffs I'm going to face as I taper off of means-tested public assistance? And then how can the workforce system, by braiding and blending adult education, WIOA Title I through integrated education and training, how can I get that person employed today and then have them comfortable understanding how they're going to eliminate their benefit cliffs and persist in the workforce?
Thank you. And second question relates to the rapid advancements we're seeing in the areas of artificial intelligence and robotics, which have been picking up steam lately in particular. And to the extent that Americans are following the latest developments, I think people see this as exciting, as potentially transformational, as holding the promise of improving the quality of life in dramatic ways for people across our country and across the world. But people also have questions about what does this mean for my career, what economic dislocations are likely to result. And so I think that the existing infrastructure we have around the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, it's clearly not adequate to that challenge, to the scale of that challenge, but perhaps there are some lessons that we can learn or pieces that can be, scaled up to try to start to deal with it. So do we have any thoughts in that respect?
Thank you for that question. I think the future of work is all about adaptability, as you described. Our economies are changing fast, and employers must help us as the education and training providers understand what skills and competencies they're looking for in automation, AI, to ensure that we can backward design programs from those needs. We must invest in programs that teach digital literacy, AI basics, data analytics, and coding to ensure that workers understand and can work alongside automation. And finally, we must partner with employers to design on-the-job training specific to these skills and competencies so employees can learn these AI tools and automation software relevant to their industry.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize my colleague from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to the witnesses for your expertise today. I supported a Stronger Workforce for America Act last year and was disappointed it was removed from the end of the year package at the 11th hour. And I know we've been hearing about that from my colleagues, and I sincerely hope we can bring this bipartisan, bicameral bill back to the floor. I was here, in fact, the first bill signing I went to as a member of Congress was WIOA in 2014. I remember sitting in this very room looking at a big chart that looked like spider webs about how we needed to make changes to streamline the program. So we're more than overdue for an update with more than a decade that passed. And I want to mention that in the Stronger Workforce for America Act, both my Partners Act, Bipartisan Partners Act and Builds Act, partners for industry partnerships with small and medium-sized businesses so they can help with workforce development programs, and the Builds Act, which is workforce development in infrastructure, bipartisan, as well as my Access Act, which I have with Mr. Thompson. Thank you for your co-sponsorship of that, to expand college and career counseling for more information about workforce opportunities. So I truly hope we can get that done. I see our role here on the Education Committee as having a path for everyone to a good future, and with the recognition that not everyone is on the same path. I just want to mention that a couple weeks ago I got to visit Benson Polytechnic High School in Portland, Oregon. Amazing. In addition to their core classes, they have programs in various industries, automotive, building construction, health occupations, digital media, electricians, skills, and more. They repair cars, they run their own radio show, they design and build tiny homes. And integrated with the core classes, you can see how engaged students are and how they're gaining not only technical skills, but all the skills of collaboration and responsibility. In fact, my state of Oregon passed by ballot initiative a career and technical education ballot measure that has actually had some pretty incredible results. We've increased graduation rates by more than 10% for vulnerable, low-income, and Hispanic Latino students, and importantly, reduced absenteeism. So we know these programs work. So moving on to where we are today, Mr. Sainz, the bipartisan Stronger Workforce for America Act authorized increased funding level for the WIOA Youth Program, which provides those vital educational support and career development skills and opportunities. So how does the federal government's investment in the WIOA Youth Program, as well as other major programs, how do they help the economy? And how would draconian across-the-board cuts at the Departments of Labor and Education affect youth in Oregon and across the country?
It is really critical that the federal government, as well as the state and local government, invest in our young people. And as you mentioned, not all young people are going off to college. Not all young people have those resources. So it is really critical that there is a mechanism, and the workforce boards and the workforce systems at the local level and at the state levels are that backdrop. They're the ones that actually are saving lives. I always say this work is not about just putting people to work. It's about changing lives, and in many cases, it's saving lives. So being able to provide those resources to be able to connect the young people back to school, back to work is critical.
And also important for the economy. We hear a lot about the skills gap and how they help address that too. And Mr. Sainz, again, so could you talk a little bit about Opportunity Youth and what it means to be an Opportunity Youth, and how your member organizations serve the Opportunity Youth, and how can the workforce system do a better job at reconnecting Opportunity Youth with quality work and educational opportunities? And will this bill, which I hope, I know it has such bipartisan support, we'll get it through?
Thank you. As I mentioned, there's 4.3 million young adults who are not at school and not at work, ages 16 to 24 throughout this country. But they're in all states, rural as well as in non-rural and urban environments. And they're just not in the rural states or in urban states, but they're concentrated in certain communities. And because of that concentration, their access to opportunities is what becomes limited. And when you look at these young people, it's not that they don't have the potential or the capacity to succeed. They just don't have the access to the opportunity to succeed. And that's where we make a difference. And statistically, as I mentioned previously, is that they do have different characteristics that, and many more of them have a physical or mental health disability, about 25%. About 30% of them are already parents. So the need to have and provide additional resources is really critical.
It gives them hope as well. And I just want to, I know I'm out of time, just mention also the importance of apprenticeships. And I've had roundtable conversations with people who said it changed their life, but not just their life, but the life of their family to have that path. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize my colleague from Pennsylvania, Ms. Thompson.
Well, thank you, Chairman, and thanks to all of our witnesses for joining us today. I think we can all agree WIOA needs to be modernized to better meet the needs of today's workforce. I was proud of the last reauthorization that we did, but we do those periodically because it's important to keep them fresh and focused on, the current state of where we're at, especially when it comes to the need for opportunity and the need for qualified and trained employees. As the co-chair of the Bipartisan Career and Technical Education Caucus, one of my priorities for this reauthorization is better coordination between Perkins and WIOA. During the last Perkins reauthorization, the primary federal investment in CTE, this committee focused heavily on ensuring that this law and WIOA were thoughtfully aligned. As a result, WIOA and Perkins have much in common, including shared goals such as preparing students and workers for growing in-demand and high-skill occupations, emphasizing the importance of work-based learning and meaningful employer engagement, and making use of aligned definition and terminology to more closely connect state CTE and workforce development systems. Now, one of the major features in what eventually became Perkins 5 were new planning elements for state CTE Perkins plans. These included new requirements that broad components of states' WIOA plans were to be incorporated within the Perkins plan to better ensure alignment. With Perkins being reauthorized 4 years after the passage of WIOA, any WIOA reauthorization must include intentional alignments with Perkins 5 to build upon the success of that legislation. One way to achieve this would be to ensure state WIOA plans include state's wider strategic vision for CTE as outlined in Perkins. And so this question really is for all of our witnesses. Can you each share your perspective on why this would be a helpful policy change in future WIOA legislation?
Well, in Alabama, we were proud to add Perkins CTE to our combined plan in 2020. We did so again in 2024 and aligned the stakeholder engagement process. I think if we could align the plan year length to be 4 years for both WIOA and Perkins, that would help. And then also to make a triad or a through line of 3 indicators of performance, particularly for Perkins, that would align Perkins and WIOA, and that would be work-based learning, secondary or post-secondary credentials of value, and dual and concurrent enrollment, so that we're creating seamless career pathways for particularly young people and adults who are in adult education and CTE to have seamless career pathways. Also, I would say that we're using the National Career Cluster Framework as the basis for our sectoral partnerships to ensure that we've got a strong industry-led sectoral partnership that's codified in state law that then guides the development of our regional and statewide in-demand jobs.
Ms. Dodge?
And what I would add, in Indiana, employers are very interested in the development of their workforce pipeline, starting with students in middle school or even earlier, with career awareness activities, plant tours, being guest speakers in classrooms, and that dovetails nicely into CTE pathways that they can enroll in high school. Those are all backward designed from industry using our community college credentials so that students in Indiana, high school students in Indiana, can not only graduate with their high school diploma, but also a college credential aligned to the workforce.
Very good.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. I would just add, I think the focus on work-based learning is a really powerful focus, and I really applaud you for that. The aligned terminology, I think, also very positive. I think also one of the challenges that we face today is that for WIOA participants, for the vast majority of them in the U.S., we actually don't know what their occupational outcomes are today. So being able to enhance wage records to make that information available will help workforce boards, training providers, individuals, and others to be more responsive to what's actually changing in the labor market, which will be critical, obviously, for CTE as well. Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Sainz?
And I'll just mention in California, the governor is currently going through a master plan for career and education training with the intent of having the alignment between the titles 1, 2, 5, as we go down that list, as well as with Perkins.
Well, I'm just saying because I'm out of time, but certainly would welcome any recommendations for specific policy changes that we can incorporate into WIOA reauthorization to better integrate CTE and workforce development systems more generally to improve cross-sector collaboration. So I look forward to your feedback in the future. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize my colleague from California, Mr. Del Sagne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all the witnesses. Mr. Sainz, nice to see you. I want to first talk a little bit, about vulnerable populations that historically have been challenging to get in the workforce, but we've been successful at with bipartisan efforts. So specifically, my predecessor in this seat, Mr. Miller up here, he's chair of this committee, when I was a county supervisor, and I'm a former juvenile probation officer, so this is a passion to me. We did a number of programs with the presiding judge of our juvenile bench, who was Reagan's administrator here in D.C. for juvenile justice. So we know these programs work. I was an advocate for a new juvenile hall. The presiding judge, Reagan appointee, kept telling me it's not big enough. We built it a few years ago. I went back and did a tour, and it's only 30% full. And when I asked the probation chiefs, I said, why is it so empty? And he said, because all those programs worked. We got them into academies. Academies we started when I was in the legislature with Governor Schwarzenegger. So these kids in a 2,000 student high school, a couple of them, know that 25 to 50 kids are getting apprenticeship standards because of deals we worked out with the unions, and the non-affiliated can participate in this as well, and with companies like Chevron, because there's a large refinery there. So all that is to say the cost effectiveness and the bipartisan efforts on these challenges for years. Could you speak to that? You have a lot of experience in this. This isn't about ideology, this is about performance. When we come together and work on these things analytically, in this instance, at-risk kids, those kids go out and get over $100,000 a year being a welder, an electrician, whatever, in industrial places in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they're not in that juvenile hall, and they're not in the criminal justice system, and they're making $100,000 a year or more and contributing to society, raising a family. That strikes me as very American and non-ideological.
Thank you, Congressman. It is great to see you, and for your longtime leadership on this issue. In California, 24 years ago, there was a bill passed by your former colleagues, Mr. Cardenas and Mr. Schiff, and the Crime Prevention Act, Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act of California, provided over $100 million specifically for juvenile justice involved kids. When I started in the probation department, myself, we had juvenile halls that had over 3,000 individuals. Now they're less than 400 that are concentrated in LA County. So that huge reduction, it was a direct result of by direct investment, not just by Workforce Investment Act dollars, but by education dollars, by support services, but it was also by local leadership that said that we cannot just lock young people up. The cost to lock an individual and a juvenile up is well over $150,000 per year. That is more than the investment that we make on a per student in education and in workforce.
And that's why the U.S. Supreme Court directed us, when I was chair of the Budget Subcommittee on Corrections, to take 25% of our adult population out of the prisons because the living circumstances were so ridiculous. Can we talk about another vulnerable population, the disabled population, another place where we've had enormous bipartisan success? President Eisenhower started this, President Reagan signed authorization, Gerald Ford signed and was very supportive of the IDEA program. So again, there's a population where we gave them a public education and have been able to put them into jobs that are appropriate for them that everybody benefits from. Could you speak to that, the importance of a workforce development all along the line?
Correct. One of the populations that are hugely vulnerable to the economic shifts is the disabled community. For the Opportunity Youth population, it's said upwards between 25 to 40% of that population have a disability, both a physical disability and or a mental health disability. That is the hidden disability. So it's an education disability. It might be, as I mentioned, a mental health disability. Being able to have the programs that are addressing their particular needs really calls for that integration of resources. One of the partners in the workforce system is the Department of Rehabilitation. And by connecting the Department of Rehabilitation with the WIOA dollars, it really does make a significant difference. There's an organization in Northern California called Pride Industries, or it's actually throughout the Southwest.
Know it well.
Yeah, so Pride Industries is a fantastic organization that works specifically with this population to be able to provide them with a career and a living wage.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize the former chair of the full committee, Dr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Ms. Dodge, in your testimony, you highlighted the provision of the bipartisan A Stronger Workforce for America Act that strengthens workforce education programs at community colleges that align with in-demand jobs. What makes community colleges the most appropriate place for industry partnerships and educating workers for in-demand jobs?
Thank you for that important question, and thank you for your leadership on this committee. Community colleges our mission is really to, it's in our name, to serve our communities. And at Ivy Tech, over 90% of our graduates stay in their local communities and stay in the state of Indiana. So we are a critical economic development driver for the state of Indiana as the state's community college. We also engage industry in meaningful and deep ways, ensuring that we understand the skills gaps that they're facing in hard-to-fill entry-level roles and design both non-credit and academic programs that meet those goals.
As a follow-up, in your testimony, you say that, quote, Indiana will need to upskill or reskill 82,000 learners annually over the next 10 years to fill, end quote, to fill jobs in growing sectors. How would the diversion of funds to places like individual training accounts and greater flexibility of funds assist workforce development organizations like community colleges?
That is a wonderful question, and I'm excited about provisions in the bill that provide flexibility in terms of how training funds can be used. In Indiana, we know that there's this tsunami of need related to upskilling and reskilling. We also know that employers are in the best position to describe the skills gap and enable us to create relevant and on-demand training programs to be funded with WIOA for that purpose.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, under the current law, there are 75,000 eligible worker education programs, but performance data is not available for most of these programs. A Stronger Workforce for America Act improves performance indicators for worker education programs like worker retention. Mr. Moore, how would these changes create a more focused system of accountability for WIOA dollars, and how will improvements in data collection and transparency impact workforce development initiatives in the state?
Thank you, Dr. Fox. Your leadership has been crucial on WIOA, so thank you. It's important that we recognize that employers are in need of thousands of open jobs that go unfilled in Alabama and nationally. And WIOA truly does need to be about employment first, but then also following up, providing the training and education somebody needs to progress through a career pathway. So by aligning the performance indicators with the needs of our economy and the jobs that are actually in demand, that can give us insights about how we braid and blend other funding mechanisms like Elementary and Secondary Education Act and Perkins CTE so that we can create the full complement of appropriate funding mechanisms. But making WIOA employment first really drives a focus of employers and training providers on labor market alignment.
Thank you. Dr. Moret, how might performance accountability, that is, improvements to data collection and quality, improve employer-driven worker education models? And when workforce development programs are employer-driven, what benefit do workers experience?
Thank you, Dr. Fox. First, I'd say the more that the workforce programs can be responsive to real labor market demand of employers, particularly for high-demand, higher-wage jobs, really both individual participants and employers will win. You'll have more of those critical jobs being filled and more people getting jobs with excellent wages. One of the challenges right now in enabling that to happen is that everyone involved doesn't have really the information that they need to be able to make well-informed decisions. That includes training providers, it includes individual participants, employers, policymakers, and workforce boards. And that's really because we don't currently track occupational outcomes of participants. And without that kind of information, and particularly without understanding both the outcomes from an occupational perspective, but also their primary work location, it's very difficult to be able to understand what those supply-demand gaps are and how to be responsive to them.
Thank you all very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Okay, thank you. Now I'd like to recognize my colleague from Guam, Mr. Moreland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. I'd like to thank the committee for hosting this important hearing today about strengthening our nation's workforce. In my district, the military buildup is bringing new industries and careers for the people of Guam, and it is critical that our workforce has the tools needed to fill these positions. Robust jobs, training models, and education systems are not only important for Guam's economy, infrastructure, and healthcare systems, but the United States national security as well. We must work together to modernize the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, to reflect the needs of today's job markets. Will prepare the American workforce to become more competitive, putting Americans on the path to success. It will also deepen the connection employers have with the workforce system and achieve better outcomes for our workers, businesses, and American taxpayer. A strong workforce is the backbone of a strong nation. So, Mr. Moret, in your testimony, you discussed the need for modernizing data systems and including more data points to close gaps in our program assessments. In May of last year, the GAO released a report that found statistical products often contain data gaps for the U.S. territories. Can you please elaborate on the difficulties for accurate data collection in certain areas, like the territories, which often suffer greater gaps than more populous areas?
Thank you, Representative Moreland. I appreciate the question. At Strada, it may help to understand that our primary focus has been on the 50 states and D.C., so we've not done really in-depth analysis of the territories. But I would say that my understanding is that Guam does not participate in the U.S. unemployment insurance system that the states do, and therefore some of the recommendations that I made earlier are not immediately applicable to Guam. What I would offer is two thoughts. One is, my understanding is Guam actually can participate in the WDQI grants that I talked about earlier, which could help to strengthen the data infrastructure there to help inform the kind of decisions that need to be made by everyone involved. And secondly, Representative Moreland, we'd be happy to follow up with your office and offer to reach out to build a relationship with the leaders in your state, in your territory, excuse me.
Thank you, that's excellent. We'll do that. Also, another question for you. Your testimony also mentions the need to expand employer-driven models to meet real workforce needs. Can you please speak further to how the models you helped develop in Louisiana and Virginia directly improve economic mobility? What are you seeing in terms of long-term sustainability for these models?
Thank you very much, Representative Moreland. Probably the two main programs I think you have in mind are the LED Fast Start program and the Virginia Talent Accelerator program. What those programs do is particularly relevant for rural regions and smaller metro areas where workforce availability concerns are most acute. One of the big shifts that's happened in America over the last 20 years is that talent considerations have really become the dominant drivers of corporate site selection decisions. Those programs are really created and have been highly effective at helping provide comprehensive, customized, fast, high-quality solutions, both to recruit employees and to fully train those employees in a job-specific way. Collectively, they've helped create tens of thousands of good jobs collectively between those two states. Those are sustainable programs the way they're structured now. They're largely modeled after a program in Georgia called Quick Start that's been around for quite some time, decades. I think in terms of mobility, the other real opportunity that states have is to better understand what their high-demand, high-wage jobs are that are going unfilled and how they can better meet those talent needs. The data improvements that I've talked about earlier, including enhanced wage records supported by the WDQI grants, would help that greatly, as would states investing in some form of a dedicated team at the state level to really produce insights based on that data that can be utilized by everyone in the system.
Thank you very much. Mr. Moret, just a real quick question for you. I see that the state can set money aside to create a critical industry skill fund, and the money for a stronger workforce for America Act must be matched with other funds. Can you explain the purpose of the Critical Industrial Skills Fund and how that could improve the workforce system?
Thank you, sir. So this would allow Alabama and other states to make sure that we're not doing random acts of workforce development and that there's skin in the game from employers and the state and the federal government. What I mean by that is many times we design a program, we put it out into the wild, and we hope that individuals and employers find value in that. With a critical industry and a sectoral partnership fund, we can lead with the demand, identify the number of jobs that are needed, the labor market shed in that area, and then create a customized and bespoke program that is funded with this braided set of funding.
I appreciate that. I've run out of time. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize my colleague from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Opportunity Youth Program and Young Adult Reentry Partnership are a lifeline to thousands of young people across the country. And it's critical that we support and expand these programs as we begin to process the process of reauthorizing the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act through this Congress. In my district, 3% of all youth ages 16 to 19 are identified opportunity youth, meaning they're not in school, they're not employed. These young people are at higher risk for persistent unemployment and low income into adulthood. They experience disproportionate mental and physical health challenges and are more likely to encounter the justice system. Thanks to WIOA's Opportunity Youth funding, programs like Pittsburgh's Partner for Work help to set these young people up for a brighter future. Partner for Work serves around 770 WIOA youth participants annually by assisting them with job training, career services, and individualized employment counseling. As a result, nearly 70% of the Opportunity Youth that Partner for Work serves enter post-secondary education or employment after leaving the program. The Opportunity Youth program is often described as a school-to-prison pipeline disruptor. School-to-prison pipeline systematically funnels kids into the juvenile justice system through zero-tolerance discipline policies, even for minor violations of school rules, overuse of suspensions and expulsions, excessive school policing, and arresting students in school. Oftentimes, Opportunity Youth become out of school and unemployed because they've fallen into this pipeline. And the Opportunity Youth gives them an opportunity to get reconnected with work and school programs before they wind up in the criminal legal system. Mr. Sainz, how does the Opportunity Youth program disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline?
Thank you. And Pittsburgh has one of the greatest programs around the country and a very strong community leadership at the local level. And how it disrupts really on three areas. Number one, it provides them the support they need to stay in school. The chronic absenteeism is one of the greatest indicators of someone going to be an Opportunity Youth or out of school. Second, it provides the work opportunities, and the subsidized support for them to actually have work opportunities is the best thing that a young person can have. And without WIOA, oftentimes they will not have that opportunity to do that. But third, it provides hope. And I think what we want to see for our young people is to have a hope for their future. And many times of the young people that are in the juvenile justice system or in the foster care system or in the homeless care system, they lack the hope of seeing themselves in the future. And that's what WIOA does to restore, is that hope for the young person that they can have a decent living, they can make or have economic mobility, they can see themselves in a different position from where they started.
Thank you. And I don't want to limit us here. I know that that's just one program that we're particularly proud of in Pittsburgh, but are there any other programs through WIOA that you think we should invest in to continue to disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline?
The REO program, which will formally get authorized through ASWA, 20% of the dollars does come into the youth, for youth specifically. And to me, that is really critical because it's identifying the dollars specifically for the young people that have gone into the criminal justice system. But also the youth apprenticeship, which is something new. And $65 million nationally is not a lot of resources, to be blunt, on a national basis. But I think it sets the precedent for youth apprenticeship that young people could earn and learn. It means that they're not taking out student loans, they're not having to compete in a 4-year degree for their future, but they could actually be hired by the employer, they're working and they're learning at the same time. So I think establishing this program under ASWA gives a huge foundation for growth and for apprenticeships as a model.
Thank you. We know all these programs they're important, and as you say, still too many young people are still falling through the cracks, and they do wind up in a criminal justice system. When they do, we must meet them with active and impactful reentry employment programs. When Pittsburgh's Partner for Work obtained a temporary grant to provide reentry employment services to citizens returning from incarceration, 67% of the returning citizens they served obtained employment within 6 months of leaving that program. As you mentioned in your testimony, a Stronger Workforce for America Act would codify these reentry grants, and 20% of the funding would be dedicated to serving youth transitioning out of the justice system. Codifying effective employment reentry programs like Partner for Works will allow them to continue to expand these vital programs. I just want to end with saying Black and brown and low-income and disabled students are disproportionately pushed into this pipeline. There's no single one opportunity for justice and youth, impact youth, but this is a start, and we have to be sure to reauthorize WIOA this Congress. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize my colleague from Indiana, Ms. Mismer.
Thank you, Chairman Owens, for allowing me to weigh in, even though I don't sit on this subcommittee. I'm honored to be here today for this hearing covering WIOA. I'm also honored to have a fellow Hoosier, Molly Dodge from Ivy Tech, as a witness on this panel. Ivy Tech is Indiana's largest post-secondary institution and the largest singly accredited statewide community college system in America. They do a lot of great work in Indiana and in my district, and it's great to have their achievements highlighted in front of this committee. Ms. Dodge, one of the goals of a Stronger Workforce for America Act is to build greater connections between the workforce system and employers. In your written statement, you talked about Ivy Tech's Achieve Your Degree program. You mentioned that preliminary research suggests that students sponsored by an employer like this program does are more likely to complete a degree certificate or degree program than other Ivy Tech students who aren't enrolled in the program. Why is this direct connection to an employer so important?
Thank you, Representative Messmer, and thank you for your support as a state congressman and also here in DC. We are very proud of our Achieve Your Degree program at Ivy Tech Community College. What started out with one employer actually in your district has now grown into a statewide program encompassing 340 employers who are actively partnering with Ivy Tech Community College to leverage their tuition benefit to upskill or reskill their incumbent workforce into hard-to-fill or new jobs. This program has actually demonstrated success for a couple of reasons. Number one, because the employer is actively engaged in choosing the program offerings that they're supporting. They have created internal career pathways within their organization, ensuring that students who complete their credential or their non-credit training have a guaranteed path to a promotion or new opportunity. And secondly, because the employer is so engaged, they often provide wraparound support and other supports and go above and beyond to ensure a student is successful in their education.
Well, and I appreciate Dr. Ellspermann's leadership on that program. Also, how does Ivy Tech measure the success of its workforce programs, particularly in terms of graduate earnings and employment?
And this is where I will highlight President Ellspermann's leadership at Ivy Tech Community College. Our strategic plan, Higher Education at the Speed of Life, has 4 metrics, 3 of which should come as no surprise. It's enrollment, retention, and completion. But under Dr. Ellspermann's leadership, we have added a 4th, which is the percentage of our graduates earning above Indiana's median wage 3 years after graduation. What this metric does is ensures that our career-linked departments across the state who are providing career counseling, work-based learning, and job placement, as well as our academic partners at the college, are aligning our programs and services to labor market needs. It's ensuring that we're routinely checking those programs. We're measuring our wage data with the help of the Indiana Department of Workforce Development, and we're reporting on that, ensuring that learners know the return on investment of coming to Ivy Tech.
Well, it's a good way to make sure that the degrees you're offering are relevant, and that's great. Mr. Moore, can you highlight what state workforce development boards can do under current WIOA authorized programs for apprenticeships?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. Registered apprenticeship is the gold standard of work-based learning. And what we can do is to better integrate state apprenticeship agencies into the public workforce system. Alabama was the first state to create a state apprenticeship agency in 25 years, back in 2019. Subsequently, more than 10 additional states have joined us. And that allows us to provide additional staffing that is state-funded and capacity to make sure that we're giving a concierge treatment for employers and individuals to serve as the sinews and mediating institutions to help connect those individuals to the opportunity with employers.
What are the roadblocks for guaranteeing success for either newly registered programs or established programs?
Most of it is the paperwork and needing to have help with somebody to be able to help with compliance issues. An employer doesn't have time to fill out 150 pages of documents. And also sometimes the incentives can be so small, even if they're state funded, to have to go through that burden. So taking the paperwork and compliance burden off of the back of the employer, letting the state handle that, has helped us to see not only participation in the apprenticeship program by the employer, but more retention among the apprentices in that employer's program.
Excellent. Dr. Moret, median earnings are already tracked within the workforce. Why is it important to track and have better understanding of hourly wage earnings?
Thank you, Representative Mesper. That's a great question. While median earnings do provide a good sense of what a typical completer might earn in the labor market, it's also not uncommon that the outcomes actually vary quite dramatically. In fact, very much by the type of occupation that someone gets. So for example, you could have a WIOA-funded training program with a median wage that was attractive, but really where half the participants had really excellent, skilled jobs connected to their training with upward mobility. The other half are working in lower wage, kind of more retail jobs that don't really have much of a career trajectory associated with them. So while the median wage might look okay, it's really masking this sort of divided outcome set. This is one of the reasons among many that we think it's critical to enhance wage records so that employers and everyone else involved can better understand outcomes and be able to make better informed choices.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our witnesses for the insight. It's a very important topic. I want to recognize my colleague, Mr. Desaulniers, to finish up and have his closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses as well. This is terrific, and it's really an opportunity for us to work together on measurements and getting people employed and measuring tough people who have a difficult time as well as people who have less difficult time in a way that produces results, which I always thought was nonpartisan or bipartisan. I'd like to have unanimous request, I have a unanimous request, Mr. Chairman, that a report from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco entitled, Did the $600 Unemployment Supplement Discourage Work?, which finds just in part that the $600 UI benefit supplemented in the CARES Act had little or no effect on the willingness of unemployed people to search for work or accept job offers, and it goes on from there. I'd like to have it entered into the record. Again, thank you all. Last Congress, as I referred to, we worked together to reach an excellent bipartisan agreement to strengthen our workforce system to help America's employers and workers. This agreement, entitled A Stronger Workforce for America Act, updated the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, to increase skills development, strengthen the connection between employers and the workforce system, and put more Americans on a pathway to success in the workforce. Unfortunately, a combination of factors, including rampant misinformation on social media, caused our agreement not to become law as we had all hoped. But I'm pleased that today's conversation had allowed us to get back on track. I urge the committee to promptly advance the same bipartisan agreement we worked so hard to reach the last Congress, and then the House to swiftly pass it into law. Doing so would be good for our workers, good for businesses, and good for the U.S. economy. Thanks again, Mr. Chairman, for convening this important hearing, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. I want to just say I too agree with the bipartisan way we've approached this. Actually, we're looking forward to having this hearing the last couple of days, because I knew it would be bipartisan. And this is probably one of the more important national security conversations we can have. How to prepare our generation, this next generation, for an explosion we're going to have over the coming years. And I'll say this, Mr. Sainz, you said something about the hope, and that's really what obligation we have to give to folks who are looking for a way to achieve their dreams. And what I appreciate is, again, the innovation, the innovators like yourself, the years you spend in your occupations to be able to sit here as experts to tell us how we can better be innovative in our way of doing this, approaching this. So just know we have a legislative body that wants us to work. Our American people deserve the opportunity. They want to get to the middle class. They have to be educated. They have to have an opportunity to reach out for something they can dream for and work hard for. And that hope is a big piece of it. So we look forward to working with you. My ask, and I say this as often as I can, you're the innovators. What we can do best is take what you have and try to legislate around that, legislate those things that can actually make a difference. So we ask you to be proactive. Reach out to us, let us know. This is a very, very important legislative piece that we need to put through. We came so close again, and we're going to make sure it happens as we get into this next time. So I want to thank my colleagues for this bipartisan approach. We're going to make sure we work together to get this done. And thank you again for the insight and expertise you've given us today. And with that, I would like to thank the witnesses again for taking this time to testify for the subcommittee. Without objections, there being no further business, the subcommittee now stands adjourned.